and welcome to Jazz and Grass and other stuff too. This is our podcast. We do it every week, and when I say we, it's me and my good friend Marcel.
Hey folks, how you doing? We talk about guitar stuff. It's pretty ill-structured.
There's no structure. Also, my name's Lyman. I forgot to mention that.
Oh, you have a name too. I think you've forgotten to mention your name in the last one, actually.
That sounds like something I would do, for sure.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's kind of neat because in this episode, we're uncovering mysteries that we laid out in the previous episode. We're doing what Lost never did. We're answering the mysteries that we set up.
Did you ever watch Lost, like really go down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, I did. I watched Lost up to, when they find like the bunker. What do they call it?
The hatch.
The hatch, yeah. And man, after the hatch, I mean, things were getting kind of weird for me. I didn't continue.
Well, you missed out on the time travel season.
Oh man, and see, I would have loved that too. I'm a huge Back to the Future fan, and I assume Lost it was all basically Back to the Future.
I really like Lost's mechanics of time travel. Like everything always happened. If somebody went back in time, they always went back in time. Like there is no changing the past.
Right. I think that's, even though this is a guitar podcast, I love that we're talking about this. I think that in terms of time travel, media, that's considered like your real standard kind of straightforward steak and potatoes time travel, right? And I think that when people play looser with the rules, it's kind of, you understand that you're existing in that universe and you're just going to play ball. I mean, like in Back to the Future, I mean, they just kind of make it up as they go, like whatever they want. You know, like Marty ruins his like family and like then just like days later, he slowly starts disappearing from the photograph. And it's like, hey, why did that take so long?
Yeah, like the Back to the Future time travel mechanics, it's like there's only one universe, but it can be changed. I'm a fan of like multiverse theory as well. Like if you go back in time, like it creates another branch of time.
Yeah. Right. And then if you have to change anything, you have to go back to that point where it converges, so you can like fix what happened if you don't want to be on a certain path.
Yeah. So this is now a time travel podcast.
And the funny thing is I pitched that to Lyman. Like when we started out, I was like, oh man, hey, we should do this time travel podcast. Let's forget about all that guitar crap. And Lyman was like, oh, that's a horrible idea. Let's do the guitar thing. And look at where we are now.
So I guess time travel is other stuff too today.
If anyone's wondering about my other favorite reoccurring segment, today Lyman is drinking out of a blue cup. If you're taking notes at home, Lyman just spilled water in his lap trying to show me the cup. That's great, man. I love that. Anyway, let's get into what we're going to talk about today. Do you want to introduce this? This is your idea. You have to take ownership of this thing.
Dangerous stuff. Simple stuff, but like a little bit dangerous in the hands of younger or newer musicians. Stuff that like simple concept seemingly to grasp, like, oh, a scale with 5 notes. Dope. I can play that over everything. And that's where you get into trouble.
Yeah, it's a cool thing because there's so many things that we learn as beginners that we kind of use as crutches and we use all the time, even though we don't really know how to use them yet. I think the only thing that we should say about this before we get going is that there's nothing wrong with doing these things. These are things that everyone just has to go through. These are like growing pains. We're all beginners at some point, and we're all going to abuse some of these things. And all you can hope for is that at some point you grow out of it.
For sure. I'll give you an example real quick. The blues scale. Danger lurks in the blues scale, and I think in particular one area. Say you're playing the A blues scale. Usually when you go into, your high school jazz band, whatever, you're starting to learn about jazz. You'll start with a simple form like a 12-bar blues, which is A7, D7, A7. And you're told you can use the blues scale over these chords, which
It's kind of true.
yeah, technically, like you can do some real interesting things. Like
You could, yeah.
but in my opinion, you gotta that's the foundation. That note, the major third, and the blues scale doesn't contain that. A blues scale does not contain C sharp, which is a pretty vital chord tone over A7.
Yeah, in my lessons and my teaching, I call that the dirty third. There is the movement of moving from a minor third to a major third. I call it the dirty third, and it's really important to include. I mean, you can create a bluesy sound, but it doesn't make sense if you never reference the chord that's actually happening underneath at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, great lines can come out of the blues scale. I mean, look at all great blues guitar. But it's one of those things. You can play A blues lines for days, but the context is this sort of movement. Over the four chord, we're in the key of A, D7. A blues actually works pretty well. It gives you a D sus7 sound. But
Yeah,
again,
and that note,
you're
that
missing
note
the
that
major
was
third.
sorry, man. The note that was a problem, that like C natural note, instead of now being like the flat third of the chord, now it's that dominant seventh. So it works out. It's fine. It's not a problem. But I mean, if you want to be a real stickler for it, I mean, you could alter the scale in another place too to honor the chord better.
Mhm.
In that you're not honoring the third of the chord anymore, right? Just like you said, it's now like suspended. So, I mean, I think that's what we're pointing at. Like, as you go over different chords, the scale potentially has to be altered for it to work over those chords.
Mm-hmm. When teaching blues, like what I like to do is just go over the arpeggios of the chords first thing. You got your 1, 3, 5 and flat 7. And I'm a jazz nerd, so when I'm playing blues, I instead of going 5, 4, 1 at the turnaround, I go 2, 5, 1. I would first teach all of the arpeggios, and then I would sort of go over like just some simple voice leading stuff, like this A7 shell voicing to this D7 shell voicing. You have these two harmonic color notes that are changing. So, like I would build my line to kind of outline that change, like. And I mean, like, who am I kidding? I play blues licks all the time. I'll give you an example, outlining some changes and playing some blues licks to complement those lines. Something like that. Does that make sense to you, Marcel?
Yeah, it does. I think that, you can get as in depth into it as you want to make it more and more sort of complicated or a complete theory. But one important thing to mention when we're talking about the 1 chord and the 4 chord when they're like in the blues like that, is that there's some really interesting voice leading happening. And you said it right there in those shell voicings. But if you want to talk about it specifically, when you go to 1 to 4, the third of the 1 chord moves up to be the root note of the 4 chord, right? Which is big. It's something we want to point out, right? And that just like you said, that's kind of the crux of your line. That's what you want to point out, is that those things are changing. The other one that you might notice, I mean, if you're thinking about blues like that, is that the dominant 7 of the 1 chord could shift down and become the third of the 4 chord. Right? You can point out all of these small half-step movements to make your line stronger. Whereas if you're just slamming away at that A minor, pentatonic, or blues scale, whatever you want to call it, you're going to be ignoring those nuanced kind of approaches that show that you know what chord you're playing over.
Absolutely. And like the place to me where I think the blues scale really shines is just over a minor chord. You could if you have like A minor, you can play that blues scale all day, and you're going to be honoring all chord tones. But it can be technically correct over a dominant chord, but also sometimes it can be technically incorrect. It's a context deal. I have a feeling in the weeks to come we're going to be referencing context a whole lot. I know we did last week.
Yeah. Well, this is cool because what you started with there is kind of like an early jazz concept, right? It's kind of an early bluegrass concept too, but normally that's not where lessons start. But, there's a lot of genres that come out of this kind of blues thinking, and it helps a lot to understand it. In fact, I would say that a lot of improvisers that are good jazz musicians or good bluegrass musicians probably could be better at the blues, and it would help their playing a lot. I know that I've personally heard a lot of great jazz musicians say things like, like that's my greatest weakness. Like I wish I was better at playing a simple blues without, having to go dip into all kinds of other stuff to make it interesting, right? Like, can I play less in that blues kind of context and still make everything make sense?
And I'm extremely weak when it comes to the blues. I don't know where I was going with that. I just wanted to take a dump on myself a little bit, I guess.
That's good, man. What I was going to say is that what I wanted to talk about in terms of like people finding these simple things that they think are really useful and then using them incorrectly comes from an early bluegrass standpoint. And it's the exact same deal. A lot of times when people learn early bluegrass stuff, the thing that they start learning is the major scale. And it makes sense because there's a lot of fiddle tunes that use the major scale and sound like the major scale, and you think that would be a good place to start. But in reality, it's kind of not. Those tunes are constructed pretty carefully. If we take kind of like an early American tune, like something like... right, something like that uses the major scale. That's all major scale. You're not going to find any other weird notes in that melody. I guess you could argue that there's some pickups. But I wouldn't argue that super strong. It's all major scale stuff, and it's purposefully picking these notes from the major scale that work over the chord at hand. And I think that's the biggest problem. And the one that I hear all the time, and I'm sorry for calling you guys out, but I tend to hear it from fiddle players because a lot of fiddle players come from classical music and they know the major scales, and they think that they can just use them over all the chords, and it doesn't work out that way. And what I hear a lot is in a bluegrass scenario, when we have this big old G chord, you have a fiddle player who's using the major scale, who's playing, and you keep hearing this major 7 note over our big old G chord, our F sharp note over our G chord. There's nothing wrong with that sound. Lyman knows that's a major 7 chord. I mean, it works in, other genres and other situations. But in bluegrass, that's probably not what we want. And you can accidentally create that by playing the major scale. Another thing that you can do that, wouldn't work out specifically would be like playing the 4th of the scale over the 1 chord. So if you're playing that C note over the G chord, if you do it purposely, it's really beautiful and it's really cool, and you've created a nice suspension. If you do it accidentally, it can sound really strange if you're just sitting on that note while someone's playing a G chord, and it's just it's such a frustrating thing. But it's the exact same situation. We're talking about taking a scale and then you have to use it over chords, and only certain parts of the scale are going to work over certain chords.
Let's talk about that C note in the key of G, because it's my favorite note to play, but where you use it and where you put it is extremely important.
Yeah, definitely.
You got to be real intentional about that, the use of that C chord. C note, sorry. Say I'm playing just G. I'll do a lot of stuff like that. I'll give, essentially, I'll be substituting a beat of G sus7 when I'm thinking of constructing my lines, and I'm playing something like that.
Yeah, but it's you're right. Your like use of it is important in that you're kind of passing through that note. You're not like grinding away at that note, and you're not like hitting it over and over again. You're not leaning on it is the word improvisers use a lot. You're not leaning on that note too hard. You just happen to pass through it, I feel like.
It's got a real strong sound of wanting to go home. This note is not home. That note is home in the key of G. One of my favorite ways to use the C note is go up to that sharp 11, the flat 5.
Yeah, you can use that if you're walking to a 5 chord.
Yeah. And even in jazz, like I would, like if there's a major tonality, I would consider in the key of G, C sharp as a consonant sound over the tonic chord, the 1 chord. You see that kind of sound? This chord has 1, 3, 6, 9, and sharp 11.
For those music nerds out there, that it's a sharp 4. If you want to talk about it that way, it creates like a Lydian sound, right? Lydian?
Yeah, Lydian.
Mode names, man, they're so easy to mix up, and then you just look like a jerk.
Yeah, don't want to mix the Lydian.
Yeah, nice. Music humor.
Yeah, like I think.
Yeah, but I mean, Go ahead.
I think of that in the key of G. That's totally a consonant sound to me. So if you're playing jazz and struggling with the key of G major, playing over the 1 chord, a good scale to use would be D major, because that'll give you G Lydian. But again, like that's dangerous knowledge. You see the key of G, don't think, oh, I can play D major and it's going to be kosher. Well, what happens when you get to like A minor or D7? Things can get a little weird.
You can paint yourself into a lot of corners just by like making that your number one philosophy. You can't do that. That can't be the only thing you think. And I made that mistake actually as like a young improviser. I remember thinking that. Like I remember it wasn't Lydian. It was what we just joked about. It was Mixolydian. And I remember hearing, oh yeah, you can use that over dominant chords, and it sounds kind of bluesy, but it contains more of the major scale, right? And I thought that was great. I thought Mixolydian was super interesting, and tons of bluegrass musicians use that kind of thinking. But you can't just apply that to every chord. It holds a lot of weight. And for a while there, I was thinking like, oh, when I see a G chord, like, oh yeah, I can play C major over that. It just doesn't work like that.
Mm-hmm. And modes to me are just they're a real interesting thing. Like when you see 2-5-1 in let's just use the key of G for the time being. You have A minor 7, D7, G major. They'll say, I've heard people say, use A Dorian over the A minor, use D Mixolydian over the D7, and then use G major, G Ionian over the G chord. Well, it's all G Ionian. That's all of those modes relate back to G major. So that's confusing to me. Like, why would I think of different names for this one scale? Is it because I want to start on? I don't want to start on the root notes a lot of the time. So I think with improvising, it's just super important to use just know what the chord tones are, and have good fingerings for them, and know them all throughout the neck.
It's very true. I mean, it's basically the first lesson I ever give when I start talking to people about improvising is, we talk about, what do you know? How are you using it? And almost without fail from, younger players or, beginning players, I hear that they have one approach and that they're using it over every chord. And, it's important to start modifying that approach for every chord that you're over. Even, for instance, if you're using the G major scale, you could use that to play over all the chords that would be natural in the key of G, but you would have to think about it very differently. And that doesn't mean trying to name all the modes while you're improvising. I don't think that really helps. But I think just like you're saying, just knowing the chord shapes and knowing the arpeggios and knowing, how the shapes work and how they relate to each other, I think is much more useful.
Mm-hmm. Like A minor 7 and D7. A minor 7 has a G, D7 has an F sharp. That F sharp leads very nicely to, or that G leads very nicely to F sharp. Those are the things I look for when I see a set of changes. The legitimate changes. What changes? Is that why they call them changes?
Oh man, we're really breaking through for Lyman right now.
Oh wow.
But yeah, you can see that a lot of times when chords are altered too, they're either altered to heighten what's changing, or they're altered to make what's changing smaller. For instance, if you take that 2-5-1 and you have an A minor 7, D7, and back to G major 7 or G6 or whatever, you can alter that in a lot of ways to make that more of a grind or less of a grind. Like if you take that A minor 7 chord and you make it an A minor 6 chord, it's going to have a lot more in common with that D7 or D9 chord that comes after it. And your approach changes because, hey, then you're basically playing over the same chord for, two parts of the progression. Mm-hmm. Or, you can alter that chord in a way that makes that change much more wild. If you put in that D7 chord, if it had a sharp 9 or a flat 9 or something, well then, hey, there's a lot more to say right there to make that change stand out.
Yeah, I could play a couple examples. A minor 11, so that's just a minor shell voicing. A, G, C, D. It's got the D on top, and then D7 flat 9 to G major 13. So you got and you got your basic shell voicings along with this nice melodic movement up top. And you can do that in reverse as well. So A minor 7, D7 flat 9, G major 7. You can also continue going up.
That's nice.
I got a ton of different examples for that.
It's kind of scary knowledge, and I'm not sure I want to impart it, just like you just said. But the idea of creating the tensions and creating the chords as more lively in some way or less lively in some way is something that you can do as an improviser too. If the changes aren't that dangerous, you can certainly still play over them like they are more dangerous, right? There's no reason why the sheet music couldn't say D7 or D9 or some kind of safe choice, and you couldn't include sharp nines and flat nines over that and make it more interesting.
Absolutely. Like, let's take the tune "So What." Like, that's pretty much just D11, D minor 11.
Is that tune that goes "So What"?
Yeah. But a lot of times when I'm playing that tune, I'll think of like a bar of D minor 7 and then a minor 2/5 back to D7. Like, I'll superimpose changes all the time, especially like over static tonic chords. I'll add 2/5s. I'll move it in minor thirds. There's a ton of different ways you can alter it, but I think it comes all the way back to just knowing what the chord tones are and knowing where these things change.
What's the really common one is when you have like a static one chord and people put a turnaround on it. There's a name for that too. What's that called?
Oh.
Like if we just had if the tune just had this written, but instead I played. Right, isn't there a name for that set of changes when you add that
turnaround?
Oh man. Well, yeah, it's a turnaround, but oh god,
I just call that a 1-6-2-5.
Now I can't think of it. Now I'll never think of it.
We will never know. We will never know.
But the point is there like is a lot of in jazz music. There is a lot of like superimposing more changes into a moment, so that way you can include more chord tones. Them being chord tones that you've just manufactured in the moment, but they still work. It's actually one of the funny things that happens when jazz musicians play bluegrass is that there isn't a lot of changes. You might have to play over a static chord for a long time, and bluegrass musicians don't add more changes. They play to that chord for a long time, and you hear a lot of jazz musicians struggle with that because they want to put more changes in, so they have more arpeggios and more like chord tones and more other things to grab. They're just not used to playing over like 6 bars of a G chord with nothing else going on and no way to impose anything else interesting on it.
That sounds like a nightmare for me. I know like 2 licks in G, and then after that, I need to go to other chords, man. After that, I'm spent. I'm done.
After that, you need to go to Jazz and Grass and look at literally every single one of my licks that's in the key of G.
I think I may just do that.
Anyway, let's kind of drop the music theory stuff. Let's get into some technique stuff that can be tough for beginners. So one thing I wanted to talk about was the pick stroke thing. A lot of times people, when they start learning, will say, hey, well, pick strokes, there's no reason why we have to put a format to this. I mean, if it makes sense for me to do 2 downs in a row or 2 ups in a row or whatever else, I should just do that. And the funny thing is that's not wrong. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that kind of thinking. Economy picking is good. Lots of good players use it. In fact, I would argue that everyone uses it, and in some context. Very few times do you meet people that are such strict alternate pickers that they won't, in some point include a double down or a double up. But the problem is that when you start doing that as a beginner, you try to do that in all places and in all forms and in some places where it doesn't even help you. And you end up getting a really inconsistent sound from your instrument because, maybe you're on the same string and you put 2 ups in a row for no reason. And then the line feels really strange because, no matter what we do, inevitably a downstroke and an upstroke are going to sound slightly different.
Yeah. I'm like one of those real staunch supporters of economy picking. But I wasn't always an economy picker. There wasn't really much rhyme or reason to what my picking technique was when I started playing for like the first 6 years of when I was playing. But yeah, like I'll use economy picking like 90% of the time. But if it's not gonna help me, then I'll do something different.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like I feel very Uncle Ben about it. I feel very with great power comes great responsibility. And sometimes it helps people who are starting out to stick to alternate picking just to have consistency. And then at some point be like, hey, you can do this too. And then their playing is stronger for the sake of having gone through the motions like everyone else, like all of us.
For sure. I had a thought.
It'll come back to you. Just work through it.
You got any more to say, like as far as like that alternate versus economy picking? Because I think I have a couple ideas on pick technique.
Yeah, so there's a really common example in bluegrass, and it's kind of the great divider of how people think about what kind of picking they want to do. And you'll find people that have different opinions about this all over. But it's about the term cross picking is really popular in bluegrass. It's basically where you have a different part of a chord on every string, and you create a repeating pattern that goes through them. So for instance, a really common one over like a G chord or a G7 chord would sound like this. Or like, it's very like ragtimey, right? But people will either alternate pick that or they'll use a pattern like down, down, up. And what I was just doing right now when I played it was I was using down, down, up. And it's one of those instances where I would rather use a pattern to make that more accessible. I think that you can get more speed out of the down, down, up in that case.
I was trying to fumble through that, and that's something where I would go down, 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 pretty much the entire thing. Maybe that's why I can't play it very well.
But
yeah,
the reason why I would do that is because when I go down, down, and I hit the next up, it's already putting my pick in the motion to return to doing the down, down motion. Right, so it's not only about conserving the motion; it's about making it so the motion repeats, and you're conserving as much energy as possible every time you play it.
How do you get that upstroke? Like, what muscles are you using in your hand?
I feel like it's more like my forearm is like popping up, to return to the place that it was. I don't feel like it's any special hand motions more. It's a weird bluegrass thing. I mean, we could talk about it forever. But the interesting thing is that I actually do it the other way. I will use alternate picking if the line is descending. So let me just come up with another line. If I had another line that was going down the strings like this, I'm just holding down a C chord. But if I had a line like that, I would alternate all that. And I don't know why that is. But I find something about the pattern of down, down, or up, up, down, and then returning pretty difficult to use. And there is a famous bluegrass musician that uses that. Jesse from Jim and Jesse is a mandolin player who does that all the time. It's just a weird thing to hear. It's uncommon. Anyway, yeah, but I feel like when you're in a situation like that where you have some kind of pattern, then I would use it a lot more. And of course, if you want another bluegrass example, the other famous one is the tune Church Street Blues by Tony Rice, which has a really cool melodic cross-picking sound. It sounds like this. And there's so much going on in that, and you're playing so many chord tones on different strings that the only way to really accurately get those out is by including some double downs or some double ups. And it's something that messes up a lot of bluegrass players, because bluegrass players do use a lot of alternate picking, and then it's like, all right, there's this one standard, this one famous tune, but to play it you have to use some economy picking. And man, if you want to hear some people mess up how a guitar part goes, Church Street Blues is a great example. There's so many people who are like kind of close, but it just doesn't sound right.
As far as pick technique goes, and I feel like this one's gonna bridge our next topic a little bit. Swing time and swing articulation.
Oh yeah,
and I have some thoughts on this. So So I'm pretty opinionated on this one. You when you enter your high school jazz band and you see you look at the sheet music and it says 2/8 notes equals quarter note triplet, eighth note triplet. I think that is in 90% of the cases wrong. Wrong. Wrong.
Yeah.
And there's a couple reasons for that. I'll play like that for a second. Just play like a line. And there's nothing like really inherently wrong with that, especially at that tempo. But what you'll find, especially with young players seeing quarter note triplet tied to eighth note triplet, is something a little bit more akin to this. The accents are on the downbeat, and
that sounded almost like a dotted eighth note tied to a 16th note, or rather being to a 16th note.
Yeah, like I'll use that like a lot more than I use a quarter note triplet tied to eighth note triplet. I think that like gets that point across a little bit more severely and can be used for greater effect. But that the problem with the quarter note triplet, eighth note triplet is the accents do not lie on the quarter note. Most of the time, the eighth notes are supposed to be accented, the ands. And because of that, you can actually get away with some really interesting stuff playing eighth notes that are almost completely even. To me, swing is all about articulation, especially playing swing on the guitar. Plucking more up notes than you are up beats than you are down beats, and hammering on, pulling off on some of the down beats. If you can really nail that articulation, like playing completely even, like something like. And that's a little bit difficult with string crossings. You can't hammer, well, you can, but it's difficult to play a coherent line like. You're not gonna have that hammer on all the time. So like swing lines, I will often put heavy accents where I think they need to be, like.
So when you're doing this, I mean, like, I don't know. Did you in high school jazz band? Shout out to our high school band teachers.
Woo!
Do you remember doing? I remember doing like a vocal exercise where we had to like vocalize how swing feels, just doing like consistent eighth notes. And I'm gonna sound like an idiot, and this is great because I just did a YouTube video that was all me like singing quietly to myself, sounding like an idiot. But I remember us doing an exercise where we were just doing like do da do da do da do da, and the whole point was just that you would like actually feel that it's almost like the pulse that you're tracking, and that's really important. Maybe not the pulse that you're tracking, but the beat that's really important is the offbeat, is the and. And not only is it important, but it's like it's not time aligned, it's not on the grid. So everyone has to work together to feel this thing in some alternate place. And I think in any way trying to take that swing feel and say, hey, it is like a triplet or it is like a dotted 8/16 is just a wrong kind of way to look at it.
Yeah, it's to me 100% wrong, but it's an easy way to get a bunch of 14 to 18-year-old kids to play something relatively similar at dark o'clock, like way too early in the morning. So
Yeah,
like
that's
I
right.
get why it's done, but I think the good exercise, like the best exercise, I went to a clinic and saw this one time from a saxophone player. She played even eighth notes, articulating every upbeat. And if you can really nail that sort of sound, giving a little bit extra to the upbeat, you don't have to shift the eighth note division too much.
Yeah.
I was told swing eighth notes are somewhere between 50-50 and 75-25. And it will vary between the tempo, but something like 55-45 with proper articulation, I think that's swinging as all hell. I may be wrong, but that's how I play, and that's how I like the sound. That's what I hear in my head.
So what if we open up this idea a little bit more and we're just talking about time? You take what you're talking about is like swing tempo is really hard for to nail, or swing time is hard to nail when you're like just starting out. It's hard to internalize that if you're not used to it, right? And it's actually probably better that they are teaching it to kids and stuff. They'll probably have an easier time trying to internalize that and get used to it. But if we just talk about time in general, time is another thing that's really hard to nail for people who are starting out. And a lot of people who are starting out will say, that they have loose time, or that they'll even use words like sloppy in trying to say that that's part of their style. And I think that that's detrimental to your playing ability as well. I mean, it's like taking something and saying, I can't do this very well, so the way that I'm doing it currently is just how I'm always going to do it, and that's me.
Wrong.
And of course, coming from a couple guitar nerds, of course, we're going to say like, hey, wouldn't it be better if you could do it any way that you wanted, if you could do it all ways? And then based on the scenario, you can decide if you're going to play really loose and kind of sloppy and all over time-wise, or if you're going to be locked to the grid, playing consistent eighth notes, or if you're going to swing them, or if you're going to, drag that and, or if you're going to rush that and, or if you're going to, there's so many things. Also,
Yeah.
On the subject of bluegrass too, just because you were thinking about swing and I was thinking about this, it's cool because the bluegrass beat, that we call the boom check, that's boom check, boom check, boom check, boom check. When you're going fast and you feel it, the chuck is rushed. So our ands in bluegrass tend to be pushed, so they happen just before where they should happen, and it's the exact same kind of feeling where our downbeats, our 1 2 3 4 happens where it should happen. That's I guess in some genres that's changed, but we feel that pulse. But our and is actually the important thing that makes it feel like the music. What makes bluegrass drive, what makes it feel like it's constantly rushing, even if it's not, is the preemptive eighth note. In the and slot, just always coming a little bit too early, and then it feels like the band's always rushing, even if the band's always in time. And it's also a really hard thing to nail. People want to play bluegrass and they just play consistent 16th notes, and it doesn't groove like you would expect it to. I just call bluegrass music groovy. I don't think anyone's ever done that before.
Well, everything has a groove. But yeah, time is to me, it's just about control. Like everything I do in music is about control, of my control over the harmony, my control over like what I can execute, and like it is cool to play real sloppy sometimes and real draggy. But I think without a foundation of really, really solid time, the point just gets lost and you're playing bad.
Yeah.
You should always start, in my opinion, from a solid foundation. And with time, that's real even eighth notes with a metronome, real even any notes with a metronome. Like, you cannot get enough metronome.
I had a good criticism when I was younger. I was taking drum lessons, and we would trade fours, me and my drum teacher. And I remember him having harsh words about, afterwards we would talk about just these 4-measure phrases that we played. And this was only like very much towards the end of when I was playing. And there was a time that I did play something kind of sloppy, and it was, it wasn't in time and it wasn't swung. It was just all over the place, I'm sure. He asked me about it, and I told him, that's what I was feeling, that I tried to play something sloppy. And he said, well, it's not working. And I thought that was excellent criticism. I mean, it's really easy to like get criticism like that and be like, hey man, whatever, like that's what I do and you just don't understand it. But in reality, it's actually kind of good criticism. Someone is telling you, hey, this really isn't working for you. And isn't that kind of what we all want? Like if you were walking around with your fly down or something, wouldn't you want someone to be like, hey man, that look is not working for you?
That's just how I dress. Come on, man.
Man. Anyway, you want to pull up some of the stuff, some of our reoccurring segments here? I feel like we got to talk about what we're listening to right now. And oh man, I want to hear you go first because mine's gonna be embarrassing. Yours was embarrassing last week, but mine's gonna be embarrassing.
I started listening to real music again, quote unquote real music.
You don't think anime soundtracks are real music?
I think they're real music. But that's my opinion. That's my interpretation.
Mom always says otherwise.
I've been getting real into Alan Holdsworth. You ever heard of Alan Holdsworth?
No, I'm in the dark.
He recently passed away, like almost a little over a year ago from the day we're recording this. But he was an incredible fusion guitar player. Had big, giant, monstrous hands. And I didn't discover him until after he passed away, as did a few of my friends. As soon as he passed away, this name started coming up, Alan Holdsworth, and we just really dove deep. Well, they really dove deep. I was kind of late to the party on him, and his technique and his approach to improvisation. Basically knowing an entire scale up and down the fretboard in all positions, and just being able to grab notes and create interesting patterns from anywhere. It's awe-inspiring. He was one of the greatest improvisers of our generation, in my opinion. So if you've never heard of Alan Holdsworth, check him out. And I've also been listening to George Garzone again. He was the inventor, creator of the triadic chromatic approach. I may have talked about it in the last couple of episodes, like briefly. He's great. Like, check him out as well. But I'll give a brief breakdown of the triadic chromatic approach.
Yeah, do it. I love it. I think it's just the weirdest thing. And I mean
in
that
the
in a
next
good way.
section.
Yeah. All right.
Because that's what I've been working on. But I'm not going to give it all away because it's his thing pretty much totally. But I'll give you a brief rundown and maybe that'll inspire you to go off and try some new interesting things. Yeah, those are the two main guys I'm listening to.
So you're not going to keep us here for like the next 2 hours talking about how this thing works?
Next section, what we're working on. And
next section will be 2 hours long. All right, so I've been reading a lot of kind of like science fiction and stuff like that, and I'm a nerd, I know, but I started replaying this RPG game that came out for a Sega console in the late 80s. I guess that would mean probably Sega Genesis. The game seems too big for that. It can't be a Genesis game. Anyway, it doesn't matter. This isn't a video game podcast. But I've been playing this game called Phantasy Star 2. It's a great RPG. I highly recommend it for all you classic game guitar nerds out there. But while I've been playing it, I thought the only soundtrack that was fitting was Rush. So I've been listening to so much Rush. I've been listening to just more than I'd ever like to admit. And I was never really a Rush fan. I feel like that's one of the classic rock bands that I kind of missed out on. You know how sometimes like you talk about classic rock stuff and someone's like a big Kansas fan or something and you're like, oh yeah, Kansas, Carry On My Wayward Son. And that's how I was with Rush. And but oh man, I've been loving it. I guess this isn't really like music theory related or anything as interesting as what Lyman said. I just really love like the whole attitude of it and the whole like expression of it. And the funny thing about it was I've been listening to all this Rush and I hopped on Instagram and I found this Jake Workman break that he played. And Jake Workman's a great bluegrass guitar player. If you don't know who that is, you should check him out. He plays guitar for Ricky Skaggs and Kentucky Thunder. But he was in Japan and he borrowed a guitar and he borrowed a pick and he like borrowed a strap and everything. And he goes to this jam and he sits in and they're playing Foggy Mountain Special and he plays a break. And it's like the most inspiring flat picking break I've heard in a long time. Not because it's like technically impressive or like his note choice is really good or anything. It just like has all that like attitude and punch that I miss sometimes. And I think it's really hard to forget that like bluegrass has that and deserves it. I mean, there's a lot of genres that like have that and should use it more, but instead get really caught up in this. Not that it's bad or anything, not that it's not good, but they're really like delicate, kind of technical. I'm going to do everything really precise and everything, blah, 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 blah. But sometimes, man, isn't it good to just hear someone, you know, for lack of a better word, kick ass?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so that's why I've been loving Rush. You can say what you want about me and about how I'm no longer a good bluegrass musician because I'm a Rush fan. But I'm sure you'll still be watching my YouTube videos and I'll be wearing a Rush shirt as soon as my Amazon order comes in.
Did you really get a Rush shirt?
I actually didn't order one yet, but I've been thinking about it. I was thinking about it in the car when I was coming back here to record this podcast. I was like, man, I got to order a Rush shirt. You know, they got the cool one that's got, it's not a pentagram, but maybe it is a pentagram. You know what? Maybe I can't wear that in bluegrass circles. I imagine the, you know, any kind of satanic imagery might be a bad choice.
When I moved down here to Arizona, like it started like a little jazz project. This drummer I was playing with would always call it good, clean, wholesome music, and that's not the story I heard about jazz. I heard it was the devil's music.
Yeah, totally. Jazz is like rough music. If you want to talk about like your classic like rock and roll stories of like how people lived and died and how they played. I mean, man, go read like a biography about Charlie Parker. That's like just putting it out there. That's a pretty rough story in life. I mean, all of them I like that though. I mean, Miles Davis and everyone else. You can get into a lot of stuff there about how people lived, but man, jazz is not a clean genre.
Take a listen to the lyrics or go read the lyrics of Honeysuckle Rose. Particularly the bridge after the first two verses. It's quite, at least I took it as quite unsavory.
You know, jazz and bluegrass, them being like turn of the century art forms, have their fair share of unsavory lyrics. If you're looking for more jazz lyrics that are dicey, you should definitely read all the words to Chic of Araby as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Possible trigger warning there. Seriously, though, it's rough. It's not good stuff in there. Yeah, bluegrass has a bunch of that, too, though. If you listen to, bluegrass is famous for murder ballads. And it's funny. It's such a big part of the genre, but I wouldn't consider like a bluegrass set complete if it didn't have a murder ballad in it. It's just a weird thing that we do. We sing about killing people, normally loved ones too.
That's pretty dope. That's really metal.
Yeah, it is. Lots of bluegrass musicians getting in fights back in the day too. There's some classic first generation people like Jimmy Martin, who was a famous bluegrass singer. I'm sure you bluegrass fans know, but he there's a little book about him where he goes and visits the Grand Ole Opry, which he was never a member of. They never made him a member of. And when they eventually asked him, he was like, screw you guys. It's been too long. I won't even do it now. But he shows up. They let him backstage and everything because he's famous. I mean, you can't say no to the guy. He can walk around. He can hang out. It's all his friends. And, he's like in his 80s at this point, and he tries to get in a fight with some people, and he's like yelling at people before they go on stage, and he's like obviously intoxicated. He had to have someone else drive his limo there. It's just incredible. The whole story is wonderful.
Wait, he was driving his own limo?
No. Someone, a writer went out to interview him, and Jimmy Martin says, "All right, we're going to the Grand Ole Opry." And though he's wasted, he puts on this, they're called nudie suits. They're like embroidered suits. They're called nudie suits. He puts on his nudie, and they get in the limo, and Jimmy Martin's like, "You're driving." It's this giant like Cadillac limo, and the writer has to like figure out how to get it out of the driveway, and then like is a chauffeur all of a sudden. Not his job. Funny stuff.
That's hilarious. I called shotgun one time in a limo.
Oh, what happened?
It was a mistake. It's actually not even my bit. That never happened. It's a Mitch Hedberg bit. I apologize. Rest in peace.
Oh, man. Anyway, how about we talk about what we're working on right now? I think you're going to be doing a lot of talking because my what I'm working on was going to be more of a question to you as well. So why don't you go first?
Okay. Did I go over this last week? The sus7 chords. I know I went over those.
Yeah, you talked about that.
I've been working with the arpeggios of those chords. Did I touch on that? Because I feel like this is a relatively new development for me.
No, go ahead.
So like that voicing would be F sus7, F, C, E flat, B flat, and one way to play that arpeggio would be just like you play the chord, starting on the A string, 8, 10, 8, 11. But what I've been trying to do is try to look for different fingerings for these patterns. This pattern starts 8 on the A string, 10 on the D string with the second finger, 13 on the D string with the fourth finger, and 11th on the B string with the second finger. So another one of those voicings arpeggios I've been using is that inversion. So that'd be up top here. G 10 fret A string, C 10 fret D string, 7 that'd be D 7th fret G string, and A 10th fret B string. I've been taking this voicing, I'm playing it here, 3 on the E string, on the low E string, that's a G, 3 on the low A string, that's a C, 5 on the low A string, that's a D, and 7 on the D string, that's a A. And I've been moving them up in groups of minor thirds. You can do that with the same fingering. or you can I use that first fingering and then 6, 6, 3, 5, and then starting on the A string 4. It's pretty much the same as the first voicing. And I've been doing a lot of parallel movement with this particular one on the DB, DGB, and GBE string sets. It was cool about these voicings is there are no minor thirds in them. So if you move them in minor thirds, you'll have 4 different chords. And that would equaling a total of 16 notes. And when you play through that pattern, moving in minor thirds, you get all 12 tones and only 4 notes are repeated over the course of, say you're playing 8th notes, 2 bars. So that's that's an interesting way for me to play sort of outside. I can start from somewhere and know I'm gonna land somewhere safe, like with a little bit of quick basic math.
Yeah, it's like it's like a bus. You like hop on a stop and you can like use it to get different places, knowing that you can hop off in another location and be okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. I also discovered another type of sus chord, and this has just been driving me crazy with how cool it sounds. It's a major 7 sus 2. And I've been messing around with the inversions of this chord. The top string set has an inversion which I think is basically impossible to play. It's probably not, but it's really difficult for me, so I found a little bit of a workaround. This is D major 7 sus 2. I think they're drop 2 voicings. This chord, this is the chord that I would say is almost impossible to play on those 4 strings. So I add in the A string. 7th fret on A, 6th fret on G, 3rd fret on B, 5th fret on E. So that gives you E, C sharp, D, A. Your next inversion, 7, 7, 5, 9. That gives you A, D, E, C sharp. You got some cool close intervals, and you got a cool close interval and a big wide one right here, a major 6th. The next inversion is C sharp, E, A, D. It's interesting because it's got that flat 9 in it. And that's 11, 9, 10, 10. And then this is where I started losing my mind. This voicing right here. This is 12, 14, 14, 12. And if you put a B under it, you get your B minor 9 voicing. And this sound was a sound I used all the time. I never even thought to check out its inversions. So, and this one's always hard to grab. So I've been exploring those sounds a little bit and just small alterations with different minor chords and major chords, making them suspended. Here's another. This is like G minor 7 with a raised 5. And this one would be
I feel like what's important to take home is that when you find a sound you like or something you enjoy, don't be satisfied with the place you can do it. Like, turn it into a system. Like, find it everywhere and make it work on it, incorporating it in such a way that it becomes part of your language in a greater sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, thank you for bringing me back down the earth, because I was about to go off the rails there for a second.
Lyman's La La Land there for a while.
And I promise I will include tab to all those voicings this time. And I'll go back and put tab for
And
the
don't
other
make
stuff.
promises you can't keep.
I actually do have a tab for all this stuff and all the old stuff. I just never uploaded it. It's there. I just need to do it.
Yeah, we'll make it happen. Dude, what I was gonna talk about, what I was gonna ask you kind of for my segment was, so I watched this video that was Tim Pierce. And Tim Pierce is a great session musician. If anyone doesn't know who that is, you should go watch a bunch of his videos. He sweeps up all the session work for like anything that ends up on the radio, whether it's like country, rock, or blues, or anything else. He plays everything, and he's excellent. But he did a little video that was talking about like playing through changes. He talks about all the time and honoring chord tones, and it's such a big part of music that I feel like people who improvise end up talking about that more than anything. But one thing he talked about, which I thought was really cool, was playing blues over changes. So like you're in a scenario where you have like a major 3 chord, and you're in, like a standard rock song or whatever. Maybe you have like 1 chord, maybe a flat 7 chord, like 4 and 5. And then you have this major 3 chord. Like, how do you continue that like blues attitude over that chord? And I thought it was such like a cool talk and a cool thing. And it drew a lot on like guitar techniques. Like, of course, like no matter what, like bending up to the 3rd is going to feel like bluesy, right? So even if it's like a new chord in a new situation, right, you can always like bend up to the 3rd and it's going to like do a thing, right? Or, if functionally the 3 chord does a certain thing, like if it's leading to like the 6 chord, the minor 6 chord or something, then you can like toss a 7 on that and you can start turning it into more of like a blues situation. But I just really like the idea, because when we think about blues, we tend to think of it as like only kind of applicable over these certain basic chords. And when you take it to a greater extent, like how do you play blues over, a flat 6 chord or something?
Are you asking me how I would approach that?
Yeah. My question was going to be like, how would you take something like that? Like if we took a weird chord in a normal song, like how would you try to play blues over that? Because I was trying it personally, and I was using just the stuff that I said to you right now, and I thought it was just like the coolest exercise.
Easy. I would run away. I'd run far away. No, just kidding. I don't know, man. Let me see if I can't like come up with something.
Because the expectation is that when that new chord happens, you want to just switch to that blues scale, but you can't do that, right? You want it to still feel rooted in the original key.
That I'm gonna have to listen to that talk for sure, because, like I said before, I'm a very poor blues player. So I wouldn't know the first thing about approaching that.
Yeah, isn't it something? I just thought it was cool in that it's just something that we don't think about, and we don't think of ways that you can approach that. It's kind of neat when you have weird chords come into a song, whether you're playing blues or major stuff or minor stuff or whatever, because you have to think like, all right, what notes from the original key can I kind of keep, and then what notes from the chord do I now have to honor that are important, right? And just switching scales entirely can sometimes give you some weird results. And if you want weird results, that's fine. But if you want to keep it more rooted, I feel like that's the much harder thing to do.
So like maybe playing in C. Over that major 3 chord. Taking the C minor pentatonic and changing the G to a G sharp, maybe?
Yeah.
That's I went back like, what is changing? And that's the first thing I thought of. So maybe that's somewhere to explore. I don't know.
Yeah. That definitely is. I don't know. It's so tough. I feel like when weird chords come up, you want to start incorporating them in a way or you want to make it jazzy or you want to do whatever. But how do you play blues over it makes the problem so much harder.
Yeah. Especially because I have very little blues background. I know that's really weird as a guitar player not having much blues background, but
we're both kind of like that. Neither of us spent a long time playing blues at all. In fact, I kind of retroactively went back to blues. Like I started playing bluegrass, and I realized that it was such a foundational part of the genre that it was dumb to not be able to do in a functional way. So I went back and started practicing that because I thought it was important, right?
Mm-hmm. It's probably important for me as a jazz musician, but like I'm a fan of the modern stuff, like those real open fourthy sounding chords. That's why I like those sus7s so much. There's lots of fourths there. I like wide intervals.
You're living that chordal life. Any more on that subject? Because I did make a promise to talk about the TCA a little bit. Yeah, I think that why don't you just give us a little background on that, and then let's wrap this baby up, huh?
Cool. So the triadic chromatic approach.
You nerd.
I'll talk a little bit just about the triadic approach today. You have 4 different types of triads: major, minor, augmented, and diminished. So you want to kind of group those into sets. We'll go with major for now. You play a major triad, and then you have 2 choices to make based on your last note. You can either go up 1/2 step or down 1/2 step. Major triad with 1/2 step in between. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky. That is against the rules for the sake of argument.
Why is it against the rules?
When you choose a new triad, you want the inversion to be different. It needs to be not a repeated inversion. So going up and then down. Let's see what we have available to us. We have that. We also have, and we have, now technically that was the same inversion, but I wanted to get to this. The permutation was different. So this and this are fundamentally different triads for the rules of the game. I'm not going to give tab or anything like this for this stuff. You can figure it out because, it's not really mine to give away. But
Isn't it funny that to like come up with a way to play outside and play weird notes, we need a system. Like we can't just play randomly. Like that's really hard for a human to do.
Yeah, it's a system to play random. Like that's what it's for. It's to give the it's sort of like a little game to create randomness. I guess I'll talk about the chromatic approach a little bit. You take one major third, and you have this note, you have all the intervals in between. And you don't want to repeat yourself in that respect either. You want to play an interval, then a different interval. And so combining those two sorts of ideas together, you get
I really hope you find that note you're looking for.
Yeah, it's a system to play randomly, and it's an interesting way to get to new places, like where you may not have thought you would get, like starting B flat. And there I'm back. Yeah, that's just a small breakdown of the triadic chromatic approach. I'm not very good at it, but it is a huge thing I'm working on right now, just doing it very, very, very slowly.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff.
Is that the week?
Yeah, I think it's time for our sign off, man.
Well, thank you so much for listening, everybody. I'm Lyman. You can find me at lymanlipke.com, link in bio. And that's basically, that'll send you onto all the other different websites that I live on.
Man, you have such a short outro, and then you make me look like a jerk when I give mine. My name's Marcel. The big place you can find me is on YouTube. That's Lessons with Marcel. Everything is Lessons with Marcel. The other big places you can find me are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And on Instagram, I also run, of course, the Jazz and Grass lick account with Lyman right here. And that's a new lick every single weekday. And you can also check out my website, lessonswithmarcel.com. That's where you can go for a bunch of free stuff that has to do with bluegrass. And that's also where you can sign up for Skype lessons if you're interested. Anyway, that's all I got.
Dope. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, see you next week.